The Gormenghast Trilogy by Mervyn Peake. Book 1. Titus Groan. The Attic. Meanwhile, Fuchsia had, after waiting patiently for her breakfast, gone to a cupboard where she kept an emergency supply of eatables, half an old seed cake and some dandelion wine. There was also a box of dates, which Flay had purloined and brought up for her several weeks before, and 2 wrinkled pears. These she wrapped in a piece of cloth. Next, she lit a candle and placed it on the floor near the wall. Then, hollowing her strong young back, she laid hold of the footrail of her bed and dragged it back sufficiently for her to squeeze herself between the rail and the wall, and to unlatch the cupboard door. Stretching over the headrail, she grasped her bundle of food and then picked up the candle from near her feet, and ducking her head, crept through the narrow opening, and found herself at the lowermost steps of the flight that led upwards in dark spirals. Closing the door behind her, she dragged a bolt into position, and the tremors which she always experienced at this moment of locking herself in took hold of her, and for a moment she shook from head to foot. Then, with her candle lighting her face, and the 3 sliding steps before her as she climbed, she ascended into her region. As Fuchsia climbed into the winding darkness, her body was impregnated and made faint by a qualm as of green April. Her heart beat painfully. This is a love that equals in its power the love of man for woman, and reaches inward as deeply. It is the love of a man or of a woman for their world, for the world of their centre where their lives burn genuinely and with a free flame. The love of the diver for his world of wavering light, his world of pearls and tendrils, and his breath at his breast. Born as a plunger into the deep, he is at one with every swarm of lime-green fish, with every coloured sponge. As he holds himself to the ocean's fairy floor, one hand clasped to a bedded whale's rib, he is complete and infinite. Pulse, power, and universe sway in his body. He is in love. The love of the painter standing alone and staring at the great coloured surface he is making. Standing with him in the room, the rearing canvas stares back with tentative shapes, halted in their growth, moving in a new rhythm from floor to ceiling. The twisted tubes, the fresh paint squeezed and smeared across the dry upon his palette. The dust beneath the easel. The paint has edged along the brush's handles. The white light in a northern sky is silent. The window gapes as he inhales his world. His world. A rented room and turpentine. He moves towards his half-born. He is in love. The rich soil crumbles through the yeoman's fingers as the pearl diver murmurs, "I am home," as he moves dimly in strange water lights, and as the painter mutters, "I am me," on his lone raft of floorboards. So the slow landsman on his acred marl says with dark Fuchsia on her twisting staircase, "I am home." It was this feeling of belonging to the winding stair and the attic which Fuchsia experienced as she ran her right hand along the wooden wall as she climbed, and encountered after some time the loose board which she expected. She drew that only 18 steps remained, and that after 2 more turns in the staircase the indescribable grey-gold filtering glow of the attic would greet her. Reaching the topmost step, she stooped and leaned over a 3-foot swing door, like the door of a byre, unfastened the latch, and entered the first of 3 sections of the attic. An infiltration of the morning sun gave the various objects a certain vague structure, but in no way dispelled the darkness. Here and there a thin beam of light threaded the warm, brooding dusk, and was filled with slowly moving motes, like an attenuate firmament of stars revolving in grave order. On one of these narrow beams lit Fuchsia's forehead and shoulder, and another plucked a note of crimson from her dress. To her right was an enormous, crumbling organ. Its pipes were broken and the keyboard shattered. Across its front, the labour of a decade of grey spiders had woven their webs into a shawl of lace. It needed but the ghost of an infanta to arise from the dust to gather it about her head and shoulders as the most fabulous of all mantillas. In the gloom, Fuchsia's eyes could barely be seen, for the light upon her forehead sank deeper shadows by contrast through her face. But they were calm. The excitement that had awakened within them on the stairway had given place to this strange calm. She stood at the stairhead almost another being. This room was the darkest. In the summer the light seemed to penetrate through the fissures in the warped wood, and through the dislodged portions of stone slating in a less direct way than was the case in the larger room or gallery to its right. The third, the smallest attic, with its steps leading upwards from the gallery with the banistered veranda, was the best lit, for it boasted a window with shutters which, when opened, gave upon a panorama of rooftops, towers, and battlements that lay in a great half-circle below. Between high bastions might be seen, hundreds of feet beneath, the portion of quadrangle, wherein, were a figure to move across, he would appear no taller than a thimble. Fuchsia took 3 paces forwards in the first of the attics, and then paused a moment to retie a string above her knee. Over her head vague rafters loomed, and while she straightened herself she noticed them and unconsciously loved them. This was the lumber room. Though very long and lofty, it looked relatively smaller than it was, for the fantastic piles of every imaginable kind of thing, from the great organ to the lost and painted head of a broken toy lion, that must one day have been a plaything of one of Fuchsia's ancestors, spread from every wall until only an avenue was left to the adjacent room. This high, narrow avenue wound down the centre of the first attic before suddenly turning at a sharp angle to the right. The fact that this room was filled with lumber did not mean that she ignored it and used it only as a place of transit. Oh no, for it was here that many long afternoons had been spent as she crawled deep into the recesses and found for herself many a strange cavern among the incongruous relics of the past. She knew of ways through the centre of what appeared to be hills of furniture, boxes, musical instruments and toys, kites, pictures, bamboo armour and helmets, flags and relics of every kind, as an Indian knows his green and secret trail. Within reach of her hand, the hide and head of a skinned baboon hung dustily over a broken drum that rose beyond, above the dim ranges of this attic medley. Huge and impregnable they looked in the warm, still half-light, but Fuchsia, as she wished to, could have disappeared awkwardly, but very suddenly into these fantastic mountains, reached their centre, and lain down upon an ancient couch with a picture book at her elbow, and been entirely lost to view within a few moments. This morning she was bound for the third of her rooms, and moved forwards through the canyon, ducking beneath the stuffed leg of a giraffe that caught a thread of the moted sunlight, and which, propped across Fuchsia's path, made a kind of low lintel immediately before the passage curved away to the right. As Fuchsia rounded this bend, she saw what she expected to see. 12 feet away were the wooden steps which led down to the second attic. The rafters above the steps were warped into a sagging curve, so that it was not possible to obtain more than a restricted view of the room beyond, but the area of empty floor that was visible gave an indication of the whole. She descended the steps. There was a ripping away of clouds, a sky, a desert, a forsaken shore spread through her. As she stepped forward on the empty board, it was for her like walking into space. Space, such as the condors have shrill inklings of, and the cock-eagle glimpses through his blood. Silence was there with a loud rhythm. The halls, towers, the rooms of Gormenghast were of another planet. Fuchsia caught at a thick lock of her hair, and dragged her own head back as her heart beat loudly, and tingling from head to foot, little diamonds appeared at the inner corners of her eyes. With what characters she had filled this lost stage of emptiness! It was here that she would see the people of her imagination, the fierce figures of her making, as they strolled from corner to corner, brooded like monsters, or flew through the air like seraphs with burning wings, or danced, or fought, or laughed, or cried. This was her attic of make-believe, where she would watch her mind's companions advancing or retreating across the dusty floor, gripping her eatables tightly in their cloth, her feet echoing dully. She walked onwards towards the fixed ladder that led to the balcony at the far end. She climbed the ladder, both feet coming together on each rung, for it was difficult for her to climb with the bottle and her food for the day tucked under her arm. There was no one to see her strong, straight back and shoulders and the gauche, indecorous movements of her legs as she climbed in her crimson dress, nor the length of her tangled and inky hair. Halfway up she was able to lift her bundle above her head and push it onto the balcony, and then to swarm after it and find herself standing with the great stage below her, as empty as an unremembered heart. As she looked down, her hands on the wooden banister that ran along the attic veranda, she knew that at a call she could set in motion the 5 main figures of her making, those whom she had so often watched below her, almost as though they were really there. At first it had not been easy to understand them, nor to tell them what to do, but now it would be easy at any rate for them to enact the scenes that she had watched them so often perform. Munster, who would crawl along the rafters and drop chuckling into the middle of the floor in a cloud of dust, and then bow to Fuchsia before turning and searching for his barrel of bright gold. Or the Rain Man, who moved always with his head lowered and his hands clasped behind him, and who had but to lift his eyelid to quell the tiger that followed him on a chain. These and the dramas in which they took part were now latent in the room below her, but Fuchsia passed the high-backed chair where she would sit at the veranda edge, pulled back the door carefully on its hinge, and entered into the third of the 3 rooms. She put her bundle upon the table in one corner, went to the window, and pushed open the 2 shutters. Her stocking was halfway down her leg again, and she knotted the string more firmly around her thigh. It was often her habit in this room to think aloud to herself, to argue with herself. Looking down from her little window upon the roofs of the castle and its adjacent buildings, she tasted the pleasure of her isolation. "I am alone," she said, her chin in her hands and her elbows on the sill. "I am quite alone. Like I enjoy it. Now I can think. For there's no one to provoke me here, not in my room. No one to tell me what I ought to do because I'm a lady. Oh no, I do just what I like here. Fuchsia is quite all right here. None of them knows where I go. Flay doesn't know. Father doesn't know. Mother doesn't know. None of them knows. Even Nanny doesn't know. Only I know. I know where I go. I go here. This is where I go. Up the stairs and into my lumber room. Through my lumber room and into my acting room. All across my acting room. And up the ladder and onto my veranda. Through the door and into my secret attic. And here it is I am. I am here now. I have been here lots of times, but that is in the past. That is over. But now, I'm here. It's in the present. This is the present. I'm looking on the roofs of the present, and I'm leaning on the present windowsill, and later on, when I'm older, I will lean on this windowsill again. Over and over again. Now I'll make myself comfortable and eat my breakfast," she continued to herself. But as she turned away, her quick eyes noticed in the corner of one of the diminished quadrangles far below her an unusually large gathering of what she could just make out to be servants from the kitchen quarters. She was so used to the panorama below her being deserted at that hour in the morning, the menials being at their multifarious duties about the castle, that she turned suddenly back to the window and stared down with a sense of suspicion and almost of fear. What was it that quickened her to a sense of something irreparable having been done? To an outsider there would have been nothing untoward or extraordinary in the fact that a group had gathered hundreds of feet below in the corner of a sunny stone quadrangle. But Fuchsia, born and bred to the iron ritual of Gormenghast, knew that something unprecedented was afoot. She stared, and as she stared, the group grew. It was enough to throw Fuchsia out of her mood and to make her uneasy and angry. "Something has happened," she said. "Something no one's told me of. They haven't told me. I don't like them. I don't like any of them. What are they all doing? Like a lot of ants down there. Why aren't they working like they should be?" She turned around and faced her little room. Everything was changed. She picked up one of the pears and bit a piece out of it abstractedly. She had looked forward to a morning of rumination and perhaps a play or two in the empty attic before she climbed down the stairs again to demand a big tea from Mrs. Slagg. There was something portentous in the group far below her. Her day was disrupted. She looked around the walls of her room. They were hung with pictures once chosen as her favourites from among the scores that had unearthed in the lumber room. One wall was filled with a great mountain scene where a road like a snake winding around and around the most impressive of crags was filled with two armies, one in yellow and the other, the invading force battling up from below, in purple. Lit as it were by torchlight, the whole scene was a constant source of wonder to Fuchsia. Yet this morning she gazed at it blankly. The other walls were less imposingly arranged, 15 pictures being distributed among the three. The head of a jaguar, a portrait of the 22nd Earl of Groan with pure white hair and a face the colour of smoke as a result of immoderate tattooing, and a group of children in pink and white muslin dresses playing with a viper were among the works which pleased her most. Hundreds of very dull heads and full-length portraits of her ancestors had been left in the lumber room. What Fuchsia wanted from a picture was something unexpected. It was as though she enjoyed the artist telling her something quite fresh and new, something she had never thought of before. A great writhing root, long since dragged from the woods of Gormenghast Mountain, stood in the centre of the room. It had been polished to a rare gloss, its every wrinkle gleaming. Fuchsia flung herself down on the most imposing article in the room, a couch of faded splendour and suavity of contour, in which the angles of Fuchsia's body as she lay in a half-sprawl were thrown out with uncompromising severity. Her eyes, which, since she had entered the attic, had taken on the calm expression so alien to her, were now smouldering again. They moved about the room as though they were seeking in vain a resting place. But neither the fantastic root nor the ingenious patterns in the carpet below her had the power to hold them. "Everything's wrong. Everything, said Fuchsia. Again she went to the window and peered down at the group in the quadrangle. By now it had grown until it filled all that was visible on the stone square. Through a flying buttress to the left of her, she could command a view of 4 distant alleys in a poor district of Gormenghast. These alleyways were pranked with little knots of folk, and Fuchsia believed that she could hear the far sound of their voices rising through the air. It was not that Fuchsia felt any particular interest in occasions, or festivities which might cause excitement below, but that this morning she felt acutely aware that something in which she would become involved was taking place. On the table lay a big coloured book of verses and pictures. It was always ready for her to open and devour. Fuchsia would turn over the pages and read the verses aloud in a deep, dramatic voice. This morning she leaned forward and turned over the pages listlessly. As she came upon a great favourite, she paused and read it through slowly. But her thoughts were elsewhere. A freckled and frivolous cake there was that sailed on a pointless sea, or any lugubrious lake there was in a manner emphatic and free. How jointlessly, oh how jointlessly the frivolous cake sailed by, on the ways of the ocean that pointlessly threw fish to the lilac sky. Oh, plenty and plenty of hake there was of a glory beyond compare, and every conceivable make there was tossed through the lilac air. Up the smooth billows and over the crests of the cumbersome cumbers flew. The frivolous cake with a knife in the wake of herself and her current he crew. Like a swordfish grim it would bounce and skim, this dinner knife fierce and blue. And the frivolous cake was filled to the brim with the fun of her currenty crew. Oh, plenty and plenty of hake there was of a glory beyond compare, and every conceivable make there was tossed through the lilac air. around the shores of the elegant isles where the catfish bask and purr, and lick their paws with adhesive smiles and wriggle from fins of fur. They fly and fly neath lilac sky where frivolous cake and the knife, who winketh his glamorous indigo eye in the wake of his future wife. The crumbs blow free down the pointless sea to the beat of a cakery heart, and the sensitive steel of the knife can feel that love is a race apart. In the speed of a lingering light are blown the crumbs to the hake above, and the tropical air vibrates to the drone of a cake in the throes of love. She ended her final verse with a rush, taking in nothing at all of its meaning. As she ended the last line mechanically, she found herself getting to her feet and making for the door. Her bundle was left behind, open, but, save for the pear, untouched on the table. She found herself on the balcony, and lowering herself down the ladder, was in the empty attic, and within a few moments had reached the head of the stairs in the lumber room. As she descended the spiral staircase, her thoughts were turning over and over. What have they done? What have they done? And it was in a precipitous mood that she entered her room and ran to the corner, where, catching hold of the pigtail bell rope, she pulled it as though to wrench it from the ceiling. Within a few moments, Mrs. Slagg came running up to the door, her slippered feet scraping along unevenly on the floorboards. Fuchsia opened the door to her, and as soon as the poor old head appeared around the panels, she shouted at it, "What's happening, Nanny? What's happening down there? Tell me at once, Nanny, or I won't love you! Tell me! Tell me!" "Quiet, my caution, quiet," said Mrs. Slagg. "What's all the bother, me conscience? Oh, my poor heart, you'll be the death of me."
"You must tell me, Nanny. Now! Or I'll hit you," said Fuchsia.
From so small a beginning of suspicion, Fuchsia's fears had grown until now, convinced by a mounting intuition. She was almost on the point of striking her old nurse, whom she loved so desperately. Nanny took hold of Fuchsia's hand between 8 old fingers and squeezed it. "A little brother for you, my pretty. Now, there's a surprise to quieten you. A little brother, just like you, my ugly darling, born in the lapshery."
"No,"
shouted Fuchsia, the blood rushing to her cheek.
No, I won't have it. No, I won't. It mustn't be.
And Fuchsia, flinging herself to the floor, burst into a passion of tears.